Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Catholic Studies in Faith and Racial Justice Symposium. My name is Gideon, and I am sophomore at Seton Hall University studying political science. Together with Reverend Pritchett and I will be your MC for our time together tonight. The great American author Ralph Ellison wrote that art, the blues, and spiritual, the jazz, and the dance was what we had in place of freedom. Each night of our symposium begins with examining some dimensions of desire for racial justice as is expressed in music. Tonight we begin with the revolutionary anthem, Strange Fruit, written by Abel Mearlopel, the high school teacher of James Baldwin, and made famous by the artist Bill Holiday. Written at the heights of the lynching era, Strange Fruit is an enduring song of protest against racial violence. It has been called both a declaration of war and the beginning of the civil rights movement. Theologian James Cone has suggested that the song made clear the connections between the lynching tree and the cross of Christ. The cross, which teaches us that the suffering and the death do not have the lasting word. The cross, which teaches us that the last shall be first. The cross, which teaches us of God's saving solidarity with the oppressed. The Strange Fruit, sung by Bill Holiday.
Southern trees bear strange fruit, blood on the leaves and blood at the root, black bodies swinging in the southern breeze, strange fruit hanging from the poplar trees. Pastoral scene of the gallant South, the bulging eyes and the twisted mouth, scent of magnolia, sweet and fresh. Then the sudden smell of burning flesh. Here's a fruit for the crows to pluck, for the rain to gather, for the wind to suck, for the sun to rot, for the tree to drop. Here's a strange and bitter
Good evening. My name is Luis de Jesus, and I'm a seminarian here at the university, studying right now at Immaculate Conception Seminary. And I invite you all to join me in our opening prayer. We read in the second chapter of the letter of James. My brothers, show no partiality as you adhere to the faith in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ. For if a man with gold rings on his fingers or in fine clothes comes into your assembly, and a poor person with shabby clothes also comes in, and you pay attention to the one wearing the fine clothes and say, "Sit here, please," while you say to the poor one, "Stand there," or "Sit at my feet," have you not made distinctions among yourselves and become judges with evil designs? Listen, my beloved brothers. Did not God choose those who are poor to be rich in faith and heirs of the kingdom that he promised to those who love him? But you dishonored the poor person. Are not the rich oppressing you? And do they themselves not haul you off to court? Is it not they who blaspheme the noble name that was invoked over you? However, if you fulfill the royal law according to the scripture, you shall love your neighbor as yourself, you are doing well. But if you show partiality, you commit sin and are convicted by the law as transgressors. We pray. O God, you yourself have condemned racism and all forms of injustice against our neighbor. Through your Son, Jesus Christ, you have commanded that we love one another. Grant that in seeking to fulfill this commandment, we may avoid all partiality and recognize our true identity as sons and daughters of the one true God, in whose image we have been made, and so respect the dignity of all human persons, born and unborn. We ask this through our Lord Jesus Christ, your Son, who lives and reigns with you and the Holy Spirit, one God, forever and ever. Amen.
Good evening and thank you. I am the Reverend Dr. Forrest Pritchett, and I want to thank Luis and Gideon for their participation as students. And I know one day I'll be welcoming Brother Luis into the ministry of the Word, so I always look forward to more comrades in arms. And for everyone's background, Gideon is from New Hampshire, and he is a Martin Luther King scholar. I have had through the grace of God, a illustrious career of over 50 years in higher education, 42 of those years here at Seton Hall. I have witnessed mountaintop moments and some valleys that we had to climb through together. But I'm so proud to be a part of this effort this evening in conjunction with the Center for Catholic Studies. If I were to take a brief moment, in addition to being a faculty member who teaches in the College of Arts and Sciences and the University Core Program, I am director of the Martin Luther King Leadership Program here at the university. And very recently, my most recent assignment also involves me as the special advisor to our university provost for matters of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And I know that one of the fondest memories I have of Seton Hall University is when I came in 1978. One of the 4 African-American bishops in the Catholic Church. Only one of them was assigned to the Northeast. His name was Bishop Joseph E. Francis. He was assigned to the Newark Archdiocese. And I believe that tonight he's looking down from heaven and he is really smiling because of the efforts of Dr. Gregory Floyd and taking over his stewardship of the Center of Catholic Studies. But in taking it over, he had a choice probably of many topics that would launch his tenure and stewardship over the center. But for him to take the time to embrace this particular theme and this particular topic, as we would say from the book of Ecclesiastes, there's a time and a season for everything. So we compliment Dr. Floyd on his initial voyage into subject matter dealing with perhaps controversy for many, but a long struggle for many others of us. So right now I am very pleased to present to many and welcome Dr. Gregory Floyd. Thank you.
Dr. Pritchett, thank you for your kind words and introduction. Good evening, Seton Hall. I am happy to welcome over 100 of you on behalf of the Center of Catholic Studies to this first night of our inaugural Faith and the Public Square series. My hope is that each fall we can gather together as a university community, students, faculty, staff, priests, and administrators, and reflect on timely issues at the intersection of faith and political life. And that this would be a means not only to learn, but to recommit ourselves to live well with one another as fellow citizens, as Luis read from the gospel, as neighbors, and also as pilgrims. I thought for our first year, we'd start with an uncontroversial and easy topic, a topic about which there's broad agreement, racial justice. I assume you're laughing or rolling your eyes at home and on mute. Few themes, if any, have divided our nation historically and presently, as have those of race, racism, and the as yet unfulfilled promissory note of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness for all Americans. These rights, according to our founders, are guaranteed because they are given to us by a creator. And we might rephrase that from the perspective of faith as saying these are rights which we must actively work to secure for each other because we are all children of God. Our topic this week for the next 4 nights, far from uncontroversial, is regrettably a timely and a difficult one, but perhaps we can become better neighbors and better citizens by listening to our speakers and to one another, by receiving and by being received. Born of that hope, our evenings this week follow a pattern, what I call a pattern of self-transcendence that is laid out by the philosopher, theologian, and Catholic priest Bernard Lonergan. According to that pattern, we begin to achieve self-transcendence or personal growth and authenticity when we stop and pay attention to our experience and to the experiences of others. When we come to understand the meanings of those experiences and judge their truthfulness. And finally, when we decide to act in accord with the truth and with love. Attention, understanding, judgment, decision, and action. These have always struck me as worthwhile goals for any university classroom and indeed for any human life. So as we begin, let me just thank our co-sponsors from across the university, campus ministry, the core program, student services, the Division of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the Religious Studies Department, and the law school. The range and diversity of these programs, departments, and initiatives suggests to me that despite our challenges, our campus is in fact populated with people of goodwill. That despite our differences and even amidst our disagreements, we can collaborate with one another in the pursuit of truth and the pursuit of justice. It is now my great pleasure this evening to invite our provost, Dr. Katia Passerini, to welcome you on behalf of Seton Hall. Provost Passerini.
Thank you, Dr. Floyd, Dr. Pritchett, and the students and participants. I appreciate you starting with this great challenge, taking the easy topic to start our series. And I appreciate the opportunity to welcome everyone to the first of 4 wonderful days. Racial justice is a difficult topic. And the connection with faith is, I think it's also a difficult topic, and I'm so glad that you started with this topic, because faith is really what equalizes us. We might come from different faiths and backgrounds, but we're all people that believe in something bigger than us. We believe in a mission, and why not that mission be that of reaching social justice? As you said, Dr. Floyd, this is also controversial. Sometimes we don't act based on our faith and we perpetuate differences. So what I hope that we will explore in this 4-day symposium is what makes us equal, but also that those actions that make us different and then continue to create divisions, and maybe we analyze them critically. This is a very difficult time to tackle this topic because we're seeing with COVID that racial injustice is out there, up in front of us. Differences in mortality rate across classes, socio-economic differences that have been exacerbated by COVID. And we also know that this is going to be a very difficult time of political elections that can further fracture us. And because a lot of these this time will be debated and those decisions in policy will be made through social media and through the internet, we risk that we further will separate ourselves, because it's been shown that the internet sometimes has been an equalizer and given us access to a lot of information, but several times, especially in the political debate, it has been a divider, polarized opinions, where everyone starts following only the news that they see, they feel they're confirming their hypothesis and their way of being. And then they take up discussions on the internet that are not respectful. They say anything because this tool seems to have really exacerbated our boundaries. So I think that's where we have to look at faith and what it teaches us about respecting others, respecting our neighbors, to really use this as an opportunity to really celebrate our differences, but also come back together in a respectful way. So I hope that these 4 nights together will bring us even more so together in the pursuit of justice and in making us better men and women of faith. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Passerini. It's now my great pleasure to introduce to some and present to others one of our newest colleagues here at Seton Hall University, Dr. Kelly Harris, who is a native of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and received his Ph.D. from the great Mecca of the South, Clark Atlanta University. If anyone ever studies the history of Black scholar production, it would be the historic Atlanta University. And the great Du Bois and many others have called that as a research from their home. Dr. Kelly's most recent assignment before becoming Director of Africana Studies at Seton Hall University was at Chicago State University, where he served not only as the Director of the Black Studies program, but was also the Interim Dean of the Honors College. It is now my pleasure to bring to everyone Dr. Kelly Harris. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Reverend Dr. Pritchett. It's my great honor and pleasure to be here tonight. I want to thank Dr. Floyd for asking me to start this presentation. It's a heavy thing to do, but I'm up for it. I appreciate it. And it is uncomfortable, but I think that we have to have these uncomfortable discussions and really grapple with this issue. Before I begin really in my discussion, my first slide I'm going to show is actually a video, short clip, less than a minute, of Wynton Marsalis talking about race and having to discuss race.
Well, race is race is like, for this country, it's like the thing in the story, in the mythology, that you have to do for the kingdom to be well. And it's always something you don't want to do. And it's always that thing that's so much about you confronting yourself that is tailor-made for you to fail dealing with it. And the question of your heroism and of your courage and of your success at dealing with this trial is, can you confront it with honesty? And do you confront it, and do you have the energy to sustain an attack on it?
Now I pulled from that quote, that video from Wynton Marsalis, because one, it captures how I felt having to talk about race. And I think it captures how a lot of people having to talk about race. And let me throw this caveat out there before I really get into this discussion. First, I did not include eugenics in my discussion. I thought about, what do I include? What do I talk about? Because there's a whole lot of history that we can talk about when we're grappling about race in this country. And I did not include eugenics in my discussion, but after I heard the comments from the president about genes, good genes, and thoroughbreds, I really kicked myself because I said, we probably should have had eugenics in there and discussing eugenics and this whole idea of scientifically showing that some people are more superior than others, whether it's based on race, class, or gender. Now, second point, I also thought about the title of this discussion, race, social construct, mental illness, or both. It actually was inspired from an essay W.E.B. Du Bois wrote in 1907. And W.E.B. Du Bois wrote an essay in 1907 called An Essay on Being Crazy. And I encourage you all to read it. I was tempted just to read the whole thing here because it's very short story, about 3 to 4 pages. But it's Du Bois in this conversation with this racist in the South, and they're discussing, integration and, going into a store. And it's a reflection on the Supreme Court decision from 1883, the civil rights cases of 1883. Now, why is all that important? Du Bois ends the essay saying, maybe you're crazy, I'm crazy, or we're both crazy. And the guy says we're both crazy. And that really, when we reflect on America, hundreds of years from now, when people look back on America and look at our history, and when people see that we have been so divided about race, people are going to say that we were crazy when we really try to unpack race and what that means. But at any rate, when we discuss race, we always have to remind ourselves that it's never really just about race. What does race imply? What does it mean? And when we think about racism and the issues that are connected with it, whether they be gender, sexuality, class, the history, when we understanding history of this country and how history has been taught and denied, and people have been marginalized and left out and treated as an other, capitalism and religion, it's all connected to this discussion of race. And to really unpack race and racism and the impact of it, we really always have to keep in mind that we're really never just talking just about race. Race is not only just a social construct, but it's also a political construct, a political concept. So it's political, it's social, and it's cultural. Next slide, please. James Baldwin. Throughout this presentation, one of the things I'm going to do is really pull on some history, but also some people, some great thinkers who have said some profound things about race. So this is James Baldwin in his work, Notes from a Native Son. I don't think that the Negro problem in America can be even discussed coherently without bearing in mind its context. Its context being the history, traditions, customs, the moral assumptions and preoccupations of the country. In short, the general social fabric. Appearances to the contrary, no one in America escapes its effects, and everyone in America bears some responsibility for it. It's very powerful because we cannot separate race from this context, this long history, this 400-year plus history in the context of America when we're really dealing with race and the social construction of not only race, but of whiteness and of blackness. And what that means to society, we really have to try to unpack that and always understand the complex. It's not just simply about history. It's about language. It's about propaganda. It's about media. It's about images. It comes in everything that we do and everything that we understand. And that's what Baldwin is talking about here, and that we always have to understand it. And it always impacts everyone. Next slide. So when we deal with this, when we look at race, so there's two things, and one thing I did not include, but one thing that we must understand. When we're dealing with the justification of enslavement and the justification of treating Black people and indigenous people and so-called yellow people, when we're dealing with how they were treated in this society, and we also should be reminded, and I'll have to come back to this, that when we deal with this whole issue of whiteness, well, I'll come back to that in a second. But when we deal with this, we always have to understand that the justification for enslaving a group of people based on their color, the Bible was used to justify it. People used the Bible inappropriately. People talked about the curse of Ham and saying that Black people came from the curse of Ham and that his son Canaan would be cursed. People talked about that, and people actually taught that. People believed that. That Black people were cursed, that the reason, and some people, Black people who were enslaved. Some of them believed it, that we were enslaved for a reason, that was in the Bible. Attendant to that, when we look at the word black and what it became synonymous with, by the end of the 16th century, we see all these different meanings for the word black, all these different synonyms for the word black, all of them negative. And I could have put something up here for white and the synonyms for white, but I think that's pretty much understood, that it's the opposite of black in terms of, in all of its variety of various meanings. Next slide. Now here, when we understand race and unpack race, and we grapple with this particular history, in America we have this great myth about the founding fathers, and one of the things that is uncomfortable, and is always an argument and always a discussion in terms of who we place as heroes. There's an African proverb that most Africana Studies scholars will talk about in their first day of class in African American Studies. And that proverb says, when lions become historians, hunters will no longer be heroes. So what that means essentially is that when we tell our story, the people who you locate as heroes probably won't be heroes for us because of the contradictions in founding this country and what this country was built on. So we know that George Washington owned slaves, but not only that, we know that his wife had even a bigger, when he married his wife, he doubled his slave population because Martha Washington came from a slave-owning family as well. But here's what's interesting, because people talk about George Washington as the father of the country. There's one book that talks about On the Judge, a runaway slave from George Washington. And it talks about while George Washington, on one hand, the father of the country, and talked about freedom and justice and equality, George Washington spent the rest of his life trying to capture his runaway slave, On the Judge. He couldn't believe that she would run away, and he and his wife were trying to get On the Judge back because On the Judge stepped outside of her place in society, her role in society. And the other one is Hercules. Hercules was George Washington's most favorite enslaved African. He was George Washington's chef. And George Washington, at one point when he left, he even told Hercules, take care of my home, watch out for it. Now why am I telling this story? Because this story really is a good indicator how miseducated people were. George Washington thought that Hercules loved him. George Washington thought that Hercules was a happy slave. And this belief is a belief that is really persistent throughout America in the 18th and 19th and early 20th century. This whole idea that enslaved people were not only docile, but that they were happy, that they were living a good life, that they loved their masters. And George Washington believed that. So when George Washington left one day, he told Hercules, he said, look, take care of the house. Look after it for me. Look after it for me. And Hercules said, sure, I'll look after it. And as soon as George Washington turned the corner, Hercules was gone. He escaped, never to be seen. He never came back again. He went to New York and they never got him again. Right? Next piece, Thomas Jefferson. When we're dealing with Thomas Jefferson and his notes, and this is a famous Thomas Jefferson's notes on the state of Virginia. When Thomas Jefferson wrote these notes, he wrote them justifying the position and role of Black people in society. I advance it therefore as a suspicion only that the Blacks, whether originally as a distant race or made distinct by time and circumstances, are inferior to whites both in body and mind. This is George Washington. Now, George Washington was no dummy. George Washington would later say that I have no doubt that God is just. He said, I tremble for my country that God is just and that his justice will not rest forever. Thomas Jefferson said that because Thomas Jefferson recognized what it was that he was doing. Next slide. One of the things that we always have to remember is that in the midst of enslavement, there were always Black voices and white voices who resisted the racial construct that was developing in America. And David Walker, who was most famous for writing an appeal to Black people in 1829, David Walker, in response to Thomas Jefferson, said, Mr. Jefferson's remarks respecting us have sank deep into the hearts of millions of whites and never will be removed this side of eternity. That's a very powerful statement. It's a very brief statement, but what David Walker hit on was correct. What Thomas Jefferson had said seeped into the minds and hearts of millions of whites, and not only his generation, but generations to come, in believing that Black people were biologically inferior to white people. And that picture is not of David Walker. We didn't have a picture of David Walker, but that's a picture of his son. That's his son, Edward Walker, who people said looked just like him. So that's why I put Edward Walker there to stand in for his father, David Walker. Next slide. Now, there's a whole bunch of history that I don't go through because I don't have that much time, and I don't want to bore you with some of this history, going through the history like this is just as a regular history class. But I should point out a few things. First thing is that Dred Scott decision in 1857. Well, even before that, this whole issue of race and the role and the place of Black people in this country was a debate for the whole period of the 19th century. The whole 19th century, we're debating, well, what to do with the African, what to do with these enslaved Africans. Some people were advocating that Black people go away. Early abolitionists, the American Colonization Society, who they believed that the presence of Black people in this country was bad for everybody, Black people and white people. So they believed in abolishing slavery, but in sending Black people back to Africa or to Haiti or to the Caribbean, getting them out of the country. And Black people rejected that. Black people from very early on would have a debate, but some Black people believed in immigration, but Black people believed that this country was ours, we fought for it, we died for it, and we're going to stay here. So they rejected that. But beyond that, in dealing with this issue of slavery and how it would expand all throughout the 19th century, it's a couple places before Douglass gives this speech that become very important. Number one is the 1857 Dred Scott decision, where the Supreme Court in his decision said that no Black person, slave or free, has any rights that a white person was bound to respect. And that decision would be the law of the land and would set the stage for Plessy v. Ferguson in 1896 that said that established separate but equal. But even before that, and this is very instructive in terms of America and how we've dealt with this issue of race. One of the things that I don't want to do, and it's sometimes I'm guilty of and other people are guilty of, we talk so much about the negative parts of our history and the racist parts of our history and how race was constructed in our history that sometimes we miss that there were other people on that other side saying that this is nonsense, that this is a farce, and not just Black voices, but white voices as well. So what do I mean by that? 1883, you had the civil rights cases of 1883, where the Supreme Court found a compilation of 5 cases that were brought to them based on the Civil Rights Act of 1875 that the Supreme Court said was unconstitutional. Now, why is that important? The Civil Rights Act of 1875 was the last Civil Rights Act, was the last act, the last thing that Charles Sumner, white Charles Sumner, who was a freedom fighter, who did not believe in the doctrine of race, who believed that Black people and white people were on equal footing. It was the last thing that Charles Sumner got pushed through Congress, the Civil Rights Act of 1875. And the sad thing is about our history and really grappling with race. One of the things that we'll find is that the Civil Rights Act of 1875, the Civil Rights Act of 1964 does the same thing that the Civil Rights Act of 1875 did. So 89 years later, we had to go and do the same thing that people figured out in 1875 needed to be done in terms of providing equal rights for people. And this was pushed through by white Republicans. And that's something that we always have to keep in mind. But here we are with Frederick Douglass. Lessons of the hour, which this presentation, I gave about 2, 3, 4 titles. I was just going to title Lessons of the Hour and reflecting on Frederick Douglass and one of his last major speeches. Frederick Douglass dies in February 20th, 1895. But Frederick Douglass gave this speech, and he begins in this speech with, "We claim to be a Christian country and a highly civilized nation. Yet I fearlessly affirm that there is nothing in the history of savages to surpass the blood-chilling horrors and fiendish excesses perpetrated against the colored people of the South, unquote. And I encourage you all to go back and read The Lessons of the Hour by Frederick Douglass, because he was trying to tell us and warn us in 1894 issues and problems that we're still dealing with in 2020. Next slide. Now, this is an often quoted by W.E.B. Du Bois, and I put it here because this really signifies how brilliant Du Bois was, but how prescient he was in trying to grapple with this. Du Bois said this, the problem of the 20th century is the color line in 1903. 1903, most of the world was colonized. Black and brown people across the world were colonized by European countries, with this firm belief that this was the white man's burden, that black and brown people did not know how to govern themselves, that they were uncivilized, that they were not blessed by God, that genetically that they were inferior, that emotionally they were like children, right? That even when we get into issues of beauty and issues of womanhood and who elevates to the level of a woman in society, all these black people find themselves on the bottom of society, black and brown people. So the problem of the 20th century is the color line, and this is the thing that we have to keep in mind. This whole issue of race is not a local issue. It's not a national issue. It's a global issue, right? Du Bois is reflecting on the Spanish-American War in 1898. Du Bois is reflecting on the Berlin Conference of 1883 and 84, where European countries, Portugal, Germany, Spain, and the United States was there as an observer, France, Italy, came together and carved up the map of Africa and said, we control all these African countries, all right? So he's reflecting on that when he's talking about this color line. Next slide. The power of propaganda. So at the same time, Du Bois was saying that this was the problem of the color line. In 1902, Thomas Dixon published the book, The Leopard Spots. The Leopard Spots, and then later on, he would publish a book a few years later called The Klansman. But here's what's interesting. And we have to, when we grapple with where we are in society now, this is why, for me, I always tell students, this is why history is important. It doesn't repeat itself, but there are always lessons from history where we can learn and pull from, and we can see similar things happening. So let's put this in context. Civil War ends in 1865. Reconstruction lasts for 12 years. But the interesting thing about Reconstruction and the end of the Civil War. Civil War ends in 1865, and the Ku Klux Klan is founded December 24th, 1865. Right? Already, white people in the South, Ku Klux Klan was founded in Pulaski, Tennessee. Already, white people in the South are saying that the Reconstruction that had already begun was corrupt. That black people are now running roughshod over white people. That black men were now able to take white women and rape white women. This is what. So the Ku Klux Klan said we were formed to protect white people. And I do not exaggerate, ladies and gentlemen, where the Ku Klux Klan was formed to take our country back. This is the language they were using at that time in 1865, right? So now as we get into the early 20th century, and so the Klan had kind of went the way of the dinosaur, so people thought, right? Even though lynchings had picked up, that strange fruit that we started off with Billie Holiday, that strange fruit. By the way, when Billie Holiday would sing that song as a protest song, people would get mad and walk out of her performances because they were there to say, just like people told LeBron James to shut up and dribble, and basketball players, people wanted Billie Holiday to shut up and just sing songs that make them feel good. They didn't want her singing Strange Fruit. So when she would sing it as a form of protest, people would walk out of her performance. But at any rate, the Strange Fruit that she talked about really began in 1880. So 1880s through the 1890s, the country is being taken back. Black people have no control over their bodies. They're being slaughtered in the South. right? But there's a progressive movement in the 1890s and in the early 20th century. But the Klan comes out of hiding again, and it's primarily because of Thomas Dixon's work, The Leopard Spots, where he gives a history of the Klan that really is more mythology than real history. And in his work talking about the Klan, he glorifies them. He talks about the Klan as being a great organization. So that helped with the birth of the Ku Klux Klan. And so when we get to The Birth of a Nation, which at the time was the first blockbuster film in American history, 1915. Woodrow Wilson showed it at the White House. The NAACP protested. They had a silent march in Washington, D.C. to protest, and all across the country, to protest the showing of this film in the White House. Woodrow Wilson, who Black people had supported, Black people thought would be a great president because he was a scholar, he was a political scientist, like I am. Woodrow Wilson showed it at the White House. And he said it was D.W. Griffiths was writing history with lightning. And he showed it and said it was a great film. And this film was a blockbuster film in American history. But it's so powerful, it was a powerful form of propaganda. Because that form of propaganda, again, showed Black people as a beast, Black men as a brute, Black men as Sambos, Black people as corrupt, Northern Republicans as corrupt. So in a duplicitous relationship, these Northern Republicans and Black people in a duplicitous relationship to take over the South, and where Black people can run roughshod over the South, and white people, carpetbaggers, can make so much money in the South. It was a great piece, too, great piece of propaganda that really lasted for quite some time. And also this work by Charles Carroll, The Negro, a Beast in the Image of God. Next slide. And these images are persistent. And I'm not going to say too much about this because I'm interested in the discussion. I'm interested. I really want you to unpack just what's your initial reaction when you see something like this. What is your initial reaction when you see LeBron James in a photo with Giselle Bündchen? What is your initial reaction? Now the artist, when this came out years ago, the artist said that he had no idea about this World War I Army recruitment poster of the gorilla and the white one. He said he had no idea. He said he'd never seen it before. And that very much might be the case, because the thing about race is so interesting in society, and the thing about propaganda in the society and the things that we learn so much and the images that we see so much about race and what we associate with it so much, we forget sometimes the things that we see. And we underestimate how those things are in our psyche. So when this artist, this photographer, when he told LeBron James and Giselle Bündchen to pose like that, we don't know what was in his psyche. Well, we do know what was in his psyche, right? And how much it looks so similar to this brute of King Kong, or this before King Kong. Next slide. History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, and if faced with courage, need not be lived again. And I found this to be so powerful from Maya Angelou, and correct. I started this discussion off by saying it's an uncomfortable discussion that we need to have, and it is. Despite its wrenching pain, we have to have these discussions. We have to unpack the terrible history of this country at every level. We have to unpack the history of race in this country, and what it means, and how people, even people who don't consider themselves racist, we have to unpack how we interpret race, right? Next slide. And this is part of the wrenching pain that Maya Angelou talked about when we're thinking about it. Now, there's different points in American history that it just shows shocking to the conscience that it really spurs action on people. One of those images, which I did not include in this slide, was the assassination, because it was an assassination of Emmett Till. It's not just a murder, it's an assassination. American terrorism. Another one, more recent, of course, is the murder of George Floyd, that people were able to see and spark people to action, and the moment that we're in. But those moments still don't measure up to this deadly riot in Elaine, Arkansas. Over 100 black people were killed, strung up. Imagine walking in Arkansas at this time, in Elaine, Arkansas, and just seeing all these bodies hanging from trees because of lies and rumors that black people were going to rebel. And that really wasn't another discussion we have. It was really about black people organizing a labor union to protect their economic rights. And I began by talking about racism is never just about race. It's always about just more than that. And we have to always remember that. Next one. For 2 years after that, and we could go on with from 1917 to 1923, the race riots that were happening in this country. And people are just learning about this. Tulsa, Oklahoma, Black Wall Street. And this is a postcard from a white person who they sent the other one. And look what they say on the postcard. Running the Negro out of Tulsa. And they spelled running wrong, but that's a whole nother discussion. But running the Negro out of Tulsa. Proud of destroying this part of culture, this part of Tulsa. Now, this is where it's famously called Black Wall Street. Black doctors, lawyers, and educators were there in Tulsa. They had a section of Tulsa that was where you had a string of black businesses, and black people were very proud. And there's a few things that could get a black person killed during that time. And really through the 19th century into the early half of the 20th century that could get you killed. Being a proud and educated black person could get you killed. Being a proud and educated black person could get you killed. Being a black person who was doing well financially could get you killed because white people did not think that that was your proper place in society, right? So in Tulsa, they destroyed the Black Wall Street section of Tulsa. They even used planes to drop bombs on the black section of Tulsa. Black people were forced to live in what we would consider now, what we would see later with the Japanese during World War II, concentration camps in Tulsa, Oklahoma. And this history then was wiped out. In Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the newspapers from that time, they took all of them out the library. So further generations could not know about that. They wanted to cut people off from that memory of what happened in Tulsa, Oklahoma in 1921. But again, going back to Maya Angelou, in her quote about history, it is wrenching pain that we have to deal with and we have to confront that makes us uncomfortable in talking about it and dealing with it. Next slide. This is Dr. King, two different speeches, both dealing with really the church, because we're talking about faith and justice. And, you know, Dr. King, a man of the cloth, flawed man, just like a whole lot of us flawed, but Dr. King still a man of the cloth. One of the things was he was very prophetic in terms of his understanding of Christianity. So this first quote from Meet the Press, and this is a famous quote. I think it is one of the tragedies of our nation, one of the shameful tragedies that 11 o'clock on Sunday morning is one of the most segregated hours, if not the most segregated hour in Christian America. And that is still true in our society. That on Sunday mornings, if you want to see segregation at work in America, go to churches across the country. And you still see, for the most part, 90+% of the church goers are white in one church. 90% of the church goers in another church are black. You still see that experience. And the same, and how we talk about religion and God, even dealing with Christianity. There's different things that we understand, even in how we interpret it, even how we digest it. There are still different discussions taking place. The student earlier mentioned James Cone, quoted James Cone. James Cone is considered the father of Black liberation theology. That's still a discussion that people have a hard time of grappling with and don't want to deal with. That's still a hard conversation, but that conversation is attendant to race and how we really have to unpack it and how we have to understand spirituality and how different people understand their relationship to a higher power. The next quote comes from a letter from a Birmingham jail. And many of us may have learned in high school when we talked about this letter from a Birmingham jail, that Dr. King was responding to Christian ministers in Birmingham, Alabama, who said that the protests that he was a part of, I was tempted to say lead, but he was just one leader. He wasn't the leader. He was one leader, but the protest that he was a part of, and which he was one of many leaders a part of, that they said that that was inappropriate for a preacher to be doing that, that we should just let that, leave that alone. And it's almost like St. Augustine's City of God, right? Give what is unto God, God's, but follow the law. Follow the laws of the land. Don't get involved in that. But at any rate, Dr. King said, we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Never again can we afford to live with the narrow, provincial, outside agitator idea. Anyone who lives inside the United States can never be considered an outsider anywhere within its bounds. The key thing here, an inescapable network of mutuality, all of our lives together. And he would say too, if we don't, and Dr. John Kennedy said this, if we don't find a way to live together, we will perish together. And I think that is true. And race is at the central heart of that comment. Next slide. Newark, 1967. The 1967 rebellion in Newark. From 1964 to 1968, there were rebellions in American cities every year. Harlem, Philadelphia, Newark, Watts, Chicago, Detroit also in 1967. And these rebellions, of course, were run this way. Now, here again, we have a point. Now, the thing again, I said a few minutes ago, we always want to be careful that we lament the negative things about our history and how people were ignorant in our history. But one of the interesting things about our history, that whether we're talking about the 19th century, the early 20th century, the mid 20th century, or present day, there have always been voices, whether it's soul voices or organizations or movements, or even legal decisions that have always gotten it right, but that we were not able to follow through on and understand. And I say this in terms of what happened to the response in Newark. After the Newark rebellion and these other rebellions, there was a Kerner Commission. Next slide. A Kerner Commission, and they came out with their report in 1968. But read part of what this Kerner Commission says. This is our basic conclusion. Our nation is moving toward two societies, one black, one white, separate and unequal. Reaction to last summer's disorders has quickened the movement and deepened the division. Discrimination and segregation have long permeated much of American life. This deepening racial division is not inevitable. The movement apart can be reversed. Choice is still possible. Our principal task is to define that choice and to press for a national resolution. To pursue our present course will involve the continuing polarization of the American community, ultimately the destruction of basic democratic values. The alternative is not blind repression or capitulation to lawlessness. It is the realization of common opportunities for all within a single society. This alternative will require a commitment to national action, compassionate, massive and sustained, backed by the resources of the most powerful and the richest nation on this earth. From every American, it will require new attitudes, new understandings, and above all, new will. That is 1968. And it's unfortunate. I'm interested in, again, to know how people respond to this report. To me, that language still applies. Their solution still applies, or being a part of the solution, because we still don't have new attitudes about race and how we deal with race. It's still something that we have to go back and look at. And the country dropped the ball the same way the country dropped the ball during Reconstruction, because people thought, and this one note I have to go back and make this note about Reconstruction. Republicans turned their backs on Democrats. By the time we finished Reconstruction, Republicans had turned their backs on Black people. Republicans by that time, by the end of Reconstruction, they said we've done enough for Black people. Democrats, of course, had never even, at that time, Black people were Republican and not Democrat. By the time we get to the Kerner Commission in 1968, white liberals are turned off by the Black Power movement. and they have been leaving the movement in droves. Some of them even went and became conservatives, but that's a whole nother discussion, right? But by 1968, Lyndon Johnson, not Nixon, Lyndon Johnson had already given up on his war on poverty, and he started talking about law and order by 1968. So when this report comes out in 1968, which Johnson established this commission, Lyndon Johnson doesn't follow the commission's advice. He had no stomach for it. The nation had no stomach for it. So from 1968 on, we see, not looking at the report, we see repression. We see more repression. This is when we see the election of Nixon in November of 1968. And then we see this commitment to law and order, and not really. So in order to grapple with the problem of race in society, one part of society said, lock them up. And you get the birth and the rise of the prison, not the birth, but the expansion of the prison industrial complex. So the way to deal with the rebellions that we're seeing in society is not to deal with the root cause, but to lock people up, criminalize people. And we're still seeing this same discussion now, the same language now of law and order used to deal with the things that we're seeing happening in response to George Floyd. And it's not just George Floyd, because we could talk about Breonna Taylor. We could talk about, go back and talk about Philando Castile. We could talk about Ahmaud Arbery. We could talk about Trayvon Martin. We could talk about Sandra Bland. We can go on and on and on and talking about this moment. So it's not just about one person. But we see on one side of the spectrum, people saying, well, you need more police force. You need to lock people up. We can't coddle people. And then on the other hand, you're seeing having people say, well, let's deal with the current commission said, let's deal with the root cause of racism and structural racism in American society. Next slide. Whiteness as the norm and blackness as a deviation. Whiteness has its own internal hierarchies as well. There are white people who may be very convinced that they are not racist, but that does not necessarily mean that they have examined or worked through how whiteness organizes their lives, values, how they are implicated in ways of talking, seeing, and doing that constantly and tacitly discriminate. That's Judith Butler that says this, a leading scholar in whiteness studies. She grapples with this whole issue of whiteness. And it's an uncomfortable conversation for white people. And this whole idea, even saying whiteness for people is uncomfortable. And just like for some people saying blackness is uncomfortable. But whiteness has been the standard as for what's normal in society, that we measure the norm by, whether it's women, whether it's womanhood, or whether it's manhood, whether it's what an education person looks like, whether a professional person looks like, or what a professor looks like. The whiteness has been the norm and the standard, and blackness has been a deviation from that standard. And that has seeped into all of our psyches. Next slide. Joy James, very short quote from her. And Joy James is an Africana Studies scholar, a brilliant scholar. Racism has endured in America because it is desirable and profitable. And that's something that, again, we have to unpack. Because, again, when we're dealing with race, it's not ever just about race. One of the things that we could have a whole discussion on is the role of race and racism and the role that Black and brown people played in building this country. The universities, the railroads, the highways, the industries that really were built on the back of Black and brown labor. So we really have to grapple with that. And present day, what's still being built on Black and brown labor. Next slide. So Nancy Fraser talks about modern forms of racial oppression and that they are part and parcel of the capitalist system. And that's, again, it's not just about race. That was one of my first slides. It's not just about race. So what about prisons for profit and the prison labor system and the prison industrial complex? How does that intersect with race? Transnational sex trafficking. We're not just talking about Black people. How does that intersect with race? Corporate land grabs. And in this context, she's talking about a global system of race where Black and brown people or land are constantly being taken. And that being really a part of the logic of capitalism. foreclosures on predatory debt, and unequal exchange. All these things that we have to unpack when we deal with race. So there's a tendency in America to talk about having a conversation about race and really people just feeling better about not being prejudiced or seeing people. But we really have to understand that race works itself into the economic system. It's structural. And what does that mean when we say it's structural? Who benefits from it? It's really a part of the policy, the public policies in society that come out that are based on this whole issue of race and this lie of race. And this is what Nancy Fraser tries to get us to grapple with. Next slide. Allison Bailey, another. She didn't come up with these concepts of privilege cognizant and privilege evasive, but she gives, I think, a good understanding of it. And a challenge to white Americans for what they have to deal with. So she says on one hand, you have privileged cognizant people who acknowledge and engage white privilege. An example she uses is, I understand how my whiteness is an asset for any move I make in life. That's privileged cognizant people. Privileged evasive are people who give responses that are defensive, epistemically closing moves that maintain white ignorance. Example, I get stopped by the police too. Another example, I have black friends, right? I'm not racist. Those are privilege evasive because there are even those who think they're not racist, there are minor things that you may feel, or may not never feel, but it gives you privilege that you may not have to acknowledge. One of the best examples people use often is when black people go into a mall. And they're in a particular store. It could be a high-end store, and they could feel some eyes following them around. Now I'm a 6'6" black man from the inner city of Philadelphia, and when I was younger, for years, when I would cut across a parking lot in a supermarket, and people were getting in their cars, I could hear doors lock quickly as I'm walking through the parking lot. It's almost like I had some kind of metal on me that automatically locked the doors because people were afraid of this 6'6" black man walking across the parking lot, assuming that I was there for nefarious purposes and not to shop. Next slide. So questions that we have to ponder, that we have to deal with. I won't read all these. Well, maybe, I won't read all the questions because I think I'm running out of time. But how do we restructure the education system to reflect the various racial, gender, sex, and class identities in the country? And this is something that people have always been trying that is extremely, extremely hard. And again, when we go back to even this current day discussions about what should be taught and what should not be taught, you've seen discussions now about how critical race theory should not be taught in any federal government agencies. That should not be discussed. How the New York Times 1619 project is a communist project and it's evil and it's Black Lives Matter, and that how it's attacking the great history of this country. And that is very telling in and of itself, because for many people, America is synonymous with white. And when we criticize America, we're criticizing white people. So for many people, they take it as that. So in talking about the history of this country, even if we go back in the examples I used about George Washington and Thomas Jefferson, there are people who would say that that's wrong to bring that up and to point those things out. People will have a problem with that. And people will have a problem with us teaching those things in K through 12 to our young people. But the really question is, can we get to where we need to go if we don't restructure the education system in the society, if we don't provide a great education for everybody? What are the steps required to close the racialized wealth gap? Another big issue. And we go on and all these questions, I think, are questions that we need to ponder and we need to deal with, not only as a university, but as a society. Next question, next slide. Now, I began, one of my earliest part of this presentation was a speech by Frederick Douglass in 1894 called The Lessons of the Hour. This is how Frederick Douglass ends his speech in 1894. Put away your race prejudice. Banish the idea that one class must rule over another. Recognize the fact that the rights of the humblest citizen are as worthy of protection as are those of the highest, and your problem will be solved. And whatever may be in store for it in the future, whether prosperity or adversity, whether it shall have foes without or foes within, whether there shall be peace or war, based upon eternal principles of truth, justice, and humanity, and with no class having any cause of the complaint of grievance, your republic will stand and flourish forever. So I think that's appropriate to end with Frederick Douglass. One of the things I wanted to show that I'm always cognizant of, there have been some brilliant people from all races in this country's history, from very profound people. And if we just go back and unpack the things that they said, we will see that the solutions to the problem of race are already in front of us. Thank you very much.
Ellie, I want to thank you. This is Dr. Pritchett on behalf of all of us who are able to enjoy your message. And I know the provost probably may have a question, and I was also going to ask a question on behalf of everyone who was on the call. But in general, two approaches to resolution. What can citizens do to begin the process to become more anti-racist, if that were the case, and to pursue racial justice? And what can we as a university do? Thank you.
Let me, okay, I'm sorry for that. I had to unmute myself. So one thing I think that citizens need to do, and I think some people are doing it already, but in your communities, we need to have discussions in our communities. You know, one of the things that myself and I'm here in the academic setting, so, you know, many scholars agree with me. One of the things about social media and in our entertainment culture, we don't go back and read as much as we should. But I think that study groups, book clubs, dealing with issues of race and dealing with history are excellent ways to have discussions, whether they're reading novels or books of nonfiction. I think there are great ways for people to have discussions about uncomfortable issues. And I think those discussions really can help lead us to solutions to problems and solutions to issues. In terms of what Seton Hall can do, I think that in some ways we're doing some of the things that we need to do by having these uncomfortable discussions about diversity and inclusion. Right now, I'm working with the College of Education and with the Amistad Commission in New Jersey to really try to offer a certificate program where we can help train teachers to teach African American studies and African American history. Because for me, as an Africana Studies professor, I always believe that how we teach history is extremely important. And I think that understanding history for all Americans and understanding history will allow us to respect each other more. When you really understand somebody, when you know their history, when you know the things that they've done in history, I think you have more respect for them. And you can't really treat somebody like in the way some people are treated. So did I answer that question?
Well, thank you very much.
Okay.
I'm going to ask the audience also if they would like to submit questions to Dr. Harris at this time. That would be very appropriate. And I was going to ask the provost. I wasn't too sure if she had a question to ask.
Yeah, I'll go while we wait for questions from the audience. You mentioned the role of education in the university. I want to go back to, you know, Brown versus Board of Education and the desegregation of schools, which then ended up in many districts based on where you live, being a de facto segregation. What can we do? You mentioned some work with the School of Education. What can we do so that public schools are in fact integrated? There are some experiments that I know of in France, south of Paris, where they are creating schools, public schools, that they're actually segmenting students from any different areas of the city. They bus them there, but they're trying a different approach that is not based on location. What do you think we can do in the U.S. to solve this de facto separation?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I think that is a part of the solution, but I also think that we have to strengthen the schools that already exist in these areas, in these poor areas. There should be no student should have a poor education just because they don't live in the right zip code, or because their family doesn't have X amount of resources. It shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way for people, and because that's a class and a race issue. It's not just a race issue. I'll give myself as an example. I went to one of the worst high schools in the city of Philadelphia, and that's not an exaggeration. I really do not recall in high school having to write a paper. That's it, and I'm not exaggerating. I don't remember it. I assume it happened. I really don't remember it. So while my brother went to a much better school than I did, and he would come home and he would talk about the books he was reading and all these kind of stuff. I'm like, I didn't have to read that. We didn't read that. We didn't read that. So I found myself, as I got older, reading a lot of the classics that I never got in high school because of the kind of education I had. And that education I'm describing, a lot of people in public schools all across this country had that same type of education, where that education is based because of their class and their race, has low expectations, right? Never expecting people to go, of course, be a professor, not expecting people to be medical doctors or engineers or anything like that, that there's a station in life that people believe that the people who live in the inner city are headed to. And that station generally is incarceration or low-wage jobs. And it's not really preparing people to be leaders in society and help transform the society. So I think that we really have to have a commitment. If we talk about public education, there has to be a commitment to have a top-notch education for every citizen in America, no matter what background they come from, no matter what class they come from. And our country hasn't done that. And people have been calling for that for years. But we just have a hard time grappling with it. But that's something I think that we should be committed to, really ensuring that everybody gets a top-notch education.
Okay, thank you. I believe, Gideon, you have a question you would like to put forward.
This is a question from the audience. It seems that anti-racism work from education to community organizing and policy changing can only go so far before it becomes anti-capitalist. In this transition, it seems many will convert to anti-racism work become a lost cause. How do we avoid this? Is it possible to be genuinely anti-racist without being also anti-capitalists?
That's an excellent question, and I think that's also an uncomfortable question that we have to deal with. I think that we have to be honest about the realities of capitalism and what it does in society. And I'm gonna go back to Dr. King, because I like to go back to Dr. King a lot. If we go back, I challenge everybody on the call tonight to go back and look at some of the last speeches of Dr. King's life, and why Dr. King was calling for a poor people's campaign. But one of the things that Dr. King said was that America suffers from the ills of racism, militarism, and materialism. And he talked about the nation having all this wealth and resources, but not using it to help people. And Dr. King was advocating, and other people advocated this too. He was advocating for a living wage that people should have. Dr. King was advocating for giving people having a floor of income that people should never fall under, no matter whether they had work or not. And that is outside the logic of the capitalist system. But I also think that when we really unpack the history of America and how hard it is for people on the bottom, and the exploitation that has happened historically in America, and the safety nets that have been in place in the society and their role and function in the society, we already don't live in a purely capitalist system. So we really have to kind of unpack what kind of capitalist system do we live in. And it's not just a local system, it's not just a national system. We have to unpack its logic as an international system. And I think that makes people uncomfortable, because now we get into this capitalism or communism binary. And I don't think that that's fair. I don't think that those are the only two systems in the world. I don't think that that's the only dialogue that we can have about the economic system in the world. But I do think that we should look at as a global system, and how capitalism there is this whole idea of racial capitalism. There's a whole, not discipline, but there's a whole set of scholarly literature on racial capitalism and how its logic works its way throughout the world. So I think that's something that we have to grapple with. So it doesn't have anti-racist, it doesn't have to be anti-capitalist, to answer your question shortly, but I think that a lot of people who advocate for anti-racism see the relationship between race and capital.
Thank you, Dr. Harris. I believe Dr. Floyd has a question at this point.
Dr. Floyd, you're muted.
Sorry, Dr. Harris, thank you for your great exposition. I was interested when I heard you say in a sort of qualified way that history doesn't simply repeat itself. And so I'm wondering, do you think there are resources in our present moment for the sort of struggle for social and racial justice that didn't exist in earlier historical eras that we can take advantage of?
You say readings?
No, resources, sorry.
Oh, resources. That's an excellent question. That really is a very good question. Well, yes, in the sense that the most basic sense is the technology that we have. So social media really gives us an attempt to get information at our fingertips that people did not have before, and having discussions and sharing things in media and seeing it immediately that people did not have access to before. Matter of fact, I think that when we really look at Black Lives Matter movement and other smaller movements around the country now, and things that are happening, they really are existing because of the power of social media. So I think that's a great tool and resource for organizing, for dealing with issues of race. I really fundamentally believe that one of the things that I think that we have to do in this country, I really believe that we should have a new constitutional convention. I'm not the first person to say that. Other people have said that. But I really think we should, because I think that we need to have something that really respects and includes the variety of people in this society, whether it's race, ethnicity, gender, class, sexuality. I really think that we need something to really represent all people in America. And social media will be good to do something like that. So that's a great resource.
Luis?
Well, you want to, are there any further questions from anyone?
Yes, Dr. Harris, if I could ask a question. You mentioned in your presentation the role of Christianity and other Christians and their beliefs with respect to slavery and using the Bible to justify such things. But in our present time, I'd like to ask, just across all Christian denominations, what positive role do you think Christianity can play now in the struggle for racial justice?
That's very good. Well, so let me first throw out and say that I'm a Christian. But I'm also a Christian who doesn't believe in the gospel of wealth. I think that's very problematic. So I really think that for me and how I understand Christianity and how I interact with it and how I practice my faith, I think that we have a responsibility. I think Christians have a responsibility to really engage with social justice work. I think Christians have that moral and spiritual responsibility to help the least of these. in my understanding of Jesus and my understanding of Christianity, I believe that that's my role and responsibility. And I think that Christians should be able to have discussions and should have discussions about the role of the church, and really how do we unpack the negative history of Christianity. I think that's something that we still haven't dealt with either. In many ways, a lot of churches have not dealt with this. You see some coming out and talking about that history, but a lot of them haven't. One of the reasons a lot of Christians like Pope Francis so much, just one of the reasons, there's many reasons, but one of the reasons is because he talked about the history of the Catholic Church and his role in the enslavement of not only Black people, but other people as well. And people appreciate that. And I think it's more honest discussions, uncomfortable, that should come from the church, whether it's the Pope or whether it's a pastor somewhere, it should come from people in the Christian churches.
So we have another question from the crowd. Thank you for having this conversation with us. It is a hard one to have. And here's the question. How can we initiate more conversations on race and similar issues? Let's assume in the university context.
So, one of the things that there's a lot of scholars I read talk about, it's interesting. A lot of people talk about this whole idea of love. And when you love, you also have to be willing to be vulnerable. And I think that's what a lot of people are not willing to be vulnerable. And I think that we really have to be vulnerable if we're going to be honest about it and get to it. And so when we talk about this history, I'm gonna use Greg Floyd for an example. So when I'm talking about white people and whiteness and racism and stuff, I'm not talking about Greg. I'm not saying, well, Greg, you know what I mean? So Greg shouldn't take it personally that I'm saying that he's a racist and that he has his whole history on his shoulders, but we have to grapple with it. We have to deal with it, and we have to be vulnerable. But I think that in all of us, there are things that we hold dear, or there are beliefs that we have, or people in our family have, or friends have, that are wrong. There are things that we said, and I'm not just talking about race. We can talk about race, sex, class, gender, right? We can talk about all that. There are things that we have said and done and believe that are just wrong. And that if we really are serious about dealing with these issues, and primary of which in this situation is race, that we have to be willing to be vulnerable and admit first to ourselves that we are wrong or that we could be wrong, and second that we need to do something about it. So we all have to come together and have these discussions in the spirit of love and willing to be vulnerable and not jump on people when they are vulnerable and when they do speak their truth. But finally, and another way of answering this question, I do believe that that white Americans have to be in white communities having these serious conversations and speaking truth to power to white people. There are just some rooms that Black people aren't going to get in. And we're just going to be an honest discussion. We're at that point yet. But I think white people with white people having these discussions in your families, in your community, you have to have it. I assume that out of all the white people that are on this call, that there's at least one who has an older family member that is racist. I assume that there's at least one person. It may not be all of you, but I assume there's at least one person in your family that is racist. So my question to you is, how do you have discussions with them? What do you talk to them about? Because that's what we have to do. We all have to be able to confront people in our families. Even before we go outside, we have to confront people in our families who we love to talk about, well, why do you believe the things you do? And talk about how it's hurtful and all those kind of things. And if it's you, I hope you do that. You find the ability to do that or have a friend that will do that for you.
Well, Dr. Harris, we want to thoroughly thank you on behalf of the Center for Catholic Studies and the entire Seton Hall University community, as well as our external friends who are joining us on the call tonight. I'm now going to take a minute just to remind, if anybody can see my lapel pin, this represents the oldest civil rights organization in the country, the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, and our founder, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois. I welcome all of you also to join with your local community networks of organizations which are already been there for a long time and doing it. Muslim friends, Jewish friends, Protestants, Catholics. We can all join together to make this happen. I'm going to invite everyone now to join me in a reading from Jeremiah 29. Because as we close out, we, as a community of faith here at Seton Hall, we believe that God is our point person. God inspires our hearts. Let us all go into this word of meditation and fellowship as we close out this evening. This is what the Lord says. When 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place. For I know the plans that I have for you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. Then you will call on me and come and pray to me, and I will listen to you. You will seek me and find me when you seek me with all of your heart. Until tomorrow evening, God bless us all. Have a good night.